Hey folks, how's it going? It's Joe here, Dietitian. I'm here with Rory, who is a colleague and dietitian as well in Canada. Today, we're going to be talking about the gut microbiome, and this is kind of a part two. And in particular, we're going to focus on two sort of main topics that I got from the client community. How long it takes for major gut microbiome changes to occur after diet modification. So we'll try to unpack that a little bit and dig into Rory's brain and see what she thinks about that. And then we've also got another topic, are processed foods with good macros and micros. I guess we could talk about the spectrum of processed foods though. So good and bad. Are they actually bad for your health? And is getting organic produce that much better than non? So we can sort of dive into that in the context of gut microbiome. Perhaps we'll try to keep it on topic because we could talk about this stuff for hours and hours. So if you guys can hear me and see me well, can you please like the video and just say yes in the comments? It just helps us to know that everything is working because there's a few tech things here going on. And then, and of course, if you come up with a question, please ask in the chat box, and if I can get to it, we'll do that, okay? So, Rory, in the meantime, do you want to quickly just introduce yourself to anyone who's new to you? I mean, just to say, like, your dietetic experience, and then also, you know, your personal reasons why you're interested in gut health.
Sounds good. So thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here again. So I am in Calgary, Alberta in Canada, and I'm a private practice dietitian here, and I've been in private practice for almost 20 years. And I started in actually different areas in eating disorders and sport nutrition. And then from there went into gut nutrition fairly early on. And I was actually diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 1986 when I was 12. So you can do the math. And had it for a long time. And through that, I now have a specialty within my private practice within GI and functional gut disorders, and work with gastroenterologists here in Canada and in Calgary.
Great. And so why I want to particularly speak with you is because you work directly with gastroenterologists, several, right? So you're kind of seeing from the medical point of view what they think about certain things, and obviously you get a lot of feedback, and I just think you can offer a new dimension to the kind of information I have already. And then, of course, yourself having a bowel disease. So I guess you work with a lot of clients. Well, is it just bowel disease, or is it also the IBS? And
yeah, it's I mean, it's a lot of inflammatory bowel disease, just because most of the gastroenterologists work with those patients who have Crohn's or colitis. I do work with a lot with patients who have colon cancer, who've done ostomy, so ostomy nutrition as well. And then there's a celiac disease, but the IBS has always been. There's a direct link with a lot of those people who have inflammatory bowel disease or other functional gut disorders and IBS. It's hard to have a digestive disease without having a malabsorption issue related to IBS at the same time. So a lot of clients that I see will have IBS prior, and then they're diagnosed, or they have the inflammatory bowel disease or different functional gut disease, and then they end up getting IBS. For those people who have disease, it's very common to have a colonoscopy or an endoscopy, and then being told by your gastroenterologist going, yeah, things look great, no inflammation, but you're suffering with bloating and you're still having cramps or diarrhea or other GI symptoms. And that's likely because of the IBS. And the nice thing about a diet like low FODMAP is that it is, it's very effective for IBS, but it's also now very effective for inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a huge overlap.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, right? It's like initially it was just, say, for IBS, but with more, like anecdotally for sure, we saw it useful in a lot of issues, and now more and more actual evidence from studies.
Yeah, and I think that that's important, like when you're talking about the perspective from a gastroenterologist, that even within the 18 to 20 years that I've been practicing, there's been a huge switch in terms of the value that they put on nutrition. compared to what was done, 20 years ago. Whether
it's always medical, right? Wasn't
medical.
yours was strictly medical? It had nothing to do with.
Yeah, take a steroid. Good luck. Eat what you can. Right? Like there was no, and that's one of the reasons I went into nutrition, is because one of the first dietitians I met when I was 12 pretty much put out, with Canada's food guide with all the food models. And I went, I'm not having peas, potato, and a glass of milk with a boost, and roast beef. That's not happening right now. Right. And it's thinking out of the box. But at that point, there wasn't much out there in terms of nutrition and the impact it could make on the gut. And it's amazing to think what's happened over the last 20 years, especially in terms of the gut microbiome, reducing inflammation, different foods that are harder, easier to absorb. None of this was out there at that time. The importance of fiber, and that's a huge one. Like when in the 80s, it was all about low fiber, white refined stuff, no fiber, peel everything, no fruits that were raw, no vegetables that were raw. And now it's like, no, you need to, focus on the fiber and have some low to moderate, sources. So, because that's the only thing that's going to promote that diversity within the gut bacteria at the same time. So things have definitely shifted. Yeah,
it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You went from no information or wrong information to so much information now, which is obviously a privilege, and it's a good thing we have access to the science we didn't have before. However, you've also got so much conflicting information now, and that's where people become very overwhelmed. They try little bits of things from different people and don't really get anywhere. Often are doing the incorrect thing as well, and they end up banging their head and feeling very frustrated. So it is an interesting time, and I'm super happy to be in this industry, as I bet you are as well.
Yeah.
So if you're watching us live, let us know where you're from. I'd love to see if we can hit every continent here. So let us know in the comments. But let's jump into the first topic, Rory. So how long it takes for major gut microbiome changes to occur post-diet modification. So just to clarify for people, I guess when we're talking about gut microbiome, we're talking about the microorganisms in the gut or your colon, your large intestine. This is where, in regards to FODMAPs, that's where the reaction would occur, where your bacteria are going to ferment or feed on these FODMAPs, and if you have an intolerance, it could cause you some symptoms. Okay, so that's what we're referring to in terms of gut microbiome. And then what changes occur post-diet modification? So I think for clarity's sake, we're talking about, I've made some diet changes, it's probably low FODMAP. I guess in certain instances it might be a gluten-free diet or something, but I guess there's not, even for me, I don't have good clarity on, like, we talked about this in your last topic. How do you measure someone's gut microbiome, what's healthy and not? We've established that that's kind of, we're not there yet. It's very hard to say, because what someone's healthy microbiome, like my healthy microbiome, would have a different makeup than yours. So there's the baseline, measuring that baseline is tricky. And then how would we actually, or how long will it take for the microbiome to change? So what are your thoughts on this question?
So in the last, 5-6 years, there's been more research in terms of the length of time, but it's not, there's not a ton in terms of how long it lasts once the changes have actually been made. So in terms of the changing of the diversity, so we start with amazing diversity within the gut when we're born, and we tend to lose it. And especially if you have a functional gut disorder, you tend to lose the diversity in the gut at the same time. So what's happening is actually within 4 to 5 days, they've seen changes in terms of the microbiome after going on something like a low FODMAP diet. Right. And so one of the concerns about people doing a low FODMAP diet long term and just never going through the reintroduction or the challenge in figuring out personalization and stacking and going through those 3 phases is that because you're changing the microbiome, you're going to have a harder time getting it back. So you might feel relief with some of the symptoms short term, but long term, you're probably doing more damage than good in terms of the gut microbiome, because you've limited the resistant starch that you're getting from a lot of the prebiotic fibers. So things like the garlic and the onion and, high sources of FODMAPs that we're restricting during the elimination. So one of the important things that I look at when I start the elimination is ensuring that people are getting enough of the soluble and resistant starch. So we offset the differences in terms of the microbiome long term. But I really emphasize at the beginning that you're going to feel a lot better because you're not going to have those malabsorption issues. But long term, you really have to watch about going through the introduction and the challenge phase, because we don't want to compromise the microbiome long term. So that 4 to 5 days, they've seen changes that the gut microbiome has been affected. What they haven't been able to determine is, once you make those changes, how long does it last? Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things that will determine how long those changes can last within the microbiome, especially if it's going in a good direction, is an overall habitual change, right? Like lifestyle, like you can't do this for like 4 weeks and then stop and expect that you're going to be able to maintain the microbiome and the diversity that you've gained. You really have to maintain it, but there's still kind of doing the research because it's so new in terms of, well, how long will that last? And what they found right now is that you really have to maintain it, right? As long as you possibly can.
So it's not just it's a full. Of course, it's diet change, but there's other components outside of diet that affects your microbiome, and then for the change to persist, you have to be consistent. It's like, I think that's just human nature. It's like if you start a workout program, and you've done it for a month, and you're stronger, and maybe your cardiovascular endurance is better, or whatever it is. But if you stop, we all know what happens. Those gains kind of go away. You regress. You must be consistent. That's kind of how the human body works, and so that's why it's important that you are doing this in a way where you've got balance in your life, where it's something you can see yourself doing for the long run, right? Rather than a crash diet or something like that. And finding that balance it's not easy for a lot of people, and that's why we say, like, we should work with someone like a dietitian who is going to help you to do that, because we're very much playing the long game, because that's the only game you should play. Otherwise, you're going to waste your time. You're gonna, if you heal something for 4 weeks and then 8 weeks later you're back to where you started, well, you've just wasted 12 weeks because you're back where you started, but you're 12 weeks older. So I'm very much about if we're going to do things, let's do it sustainably and do it properly. And so you said if we're doing low FODMAP diet, it changes the microbiome within 4 or 5 days. Mm-hmm. Adversely is what they've seen in studies, right, where the diversity of, say, bifidobacteria or whichever strain is kind of constrained, and then we believe that's negative, right? The goal is to have a diverse range of bacteria. Is that how it works?
Yeah. And so one of the things that within the studies that they've looked at where the microbiome has changed and what causes the good changes within the more diversity within the microbiome is the kinds of foods that really impact it. And it's the fiber and more plant, but like lots of fruits and vegetables, like as many as you can. And obviously in low FODMAP, I find that the vegetables are a little bit more limited in terms of the fruits, in terms of variety, right? And then you're also looking at like more plant-based diets and things like that, right? So those kinds of things will promote a better diversity, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can't have proteins and meats and things like that, but it's how to maintain it. I think one of the nice things about working with somebody who knows what they're doing in terms of low FODMAP is that each phase has something different for it that you can focus on. It's not all about these are the foods you can have and these are the ones I'd like you to limit. It's about like the elimination phase. Like, let's try to limit, those foods that are really causing a malabsorption issue. And then during the reintroduction or the challenge, really looking at like the load and how much you can handle, and thinking kind of out of the box and going through more structure and maintaining, the GI symptoms, like improving the GI symptoms at the same time. But that personalization and stacking phase is so important. And throughout the entire thing, all 3 phases, one of the questions I ask is, oh, did you have a reaction when you had that high FODMAP food, even though you're in elimination? But really focusing on the fiber and saying, but have you kept the fiber consistent for all 3 phases? Because that's, in terms of what you were talking about, Joe, with the sustainability, that's what's super important. Like, you have to be able to, like, oh, but are you continuing to add the fiber in? Because people are absorbing things better at the same time as well. And it's such a great opportunity to not just look at low FODMAP, but it's like the fiber at the same time, in terms of, just ensuring that the microbiome will be a lot healthier and a lot more diverse for as long as you possibly can get it. And fiber can be very diverse, right? In terms of what you can add. It doesn't necessarily mean, adding some kind of fiber supplement or blah, blah, blah. Like, you can get fiber from a whole wide range of foods. So it gives people an opportunity to try different things and what works for them, which is, I think, more successful for people than using the same thing every single day, because you can't do that for the rest of your life. Like, it's just not, it's hard to maintain, right?
What number do you aim for with fiber?
So 25 grams. In Canada, it's 25 grams for women and then 38 grams for men. That being said, if somebody is coming with severe constipation, 25 grams for women would probably be the baseline, right? Like, a lot of women will need 30 grams. It might go beyond that. So I think when I'm doing tracking, I have people track the amount of fiber that they're having at the same time. And if they're seeing how many grams of fiber they're getting, especially during the elimination, and they can hit 20 to 25 grams during the elimination phase, then I know it's going to be a lot easier for them to sustain that post-elimination into the reintroduction challenge and personalization. Because it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know, like, well, how much fiber am I having? And I don't expect people to be like, walking around with, like, little thing in their wallet, how many grams of fiber is this and this and this. So using an app or something like that they can track the fiber in is super helpful, because then they know where they're at. Because a lot of people think they're having more fiber than what they actually are.
There's absolutely no way to do this without tracking at some point. You have to track forever, but you cannot connect the dots without the pieces in front of you.
Yeah.
And to have the pieces in front of you, you've got to put them down. So you've got to track, and not only tracking your intake, but tracking your symptoms. And that's what we do with clients. Like, it's not rocket science, but it's the process of doing it, and then having someone who can look at your tracking and your symptoms and connect the dots and know what's wrong, or potentially what's causing it, or at least methodically work with you to figure out what exactly is the issue, because it's typically not everything there. It's only a few things. And I don't want to open another topic, but it may or may not even be FODMAP compounds. Right. Do you ever have clients that you do low fiber with, or have seen good results? And if so, what?
I think it's the education in terms of what kind of fiber people are adding, right? With inflammatory bowel disease, it's, for people who are in a flare, I'm not adding high amounts of insoluble fiber, that really difficult fiber for people to digest and absorb, because that's just going to feel like jagged swords going through their system. If somebody's looking to, if somebody's super inflamed and they've been in and out of hospital and really not feeling well, adding raw carrots to the mix is not going to help, whether it's low or high FODMAP. So it's the education in terms of the fiber source that really makes a difference. And I'd rather people, modify the kind of fiber that they're getting from carrots by, juicing it or roasting it or throwing it into soup and still getting the nutrients they can have, because they're absorbing them, especially because in that case, it's a low FODMAP food anyway, right? But the insoluble fiber is just not going to work at that time. What's interesting is, over the course of something, when people, over the course of the elimination, when people are improving their malabsorption issue and they're inflamed and they have, an inflammatory condition like Crohn's or colitis, is that modifying the FODMAPs can actually help them increase or include more of the insoluble fiber source. So people who were not going near salads before might be able to tolerate a salad now, just because there's a lot less strain on the gut. So it is an opportunity to kind of try different sources of fiber for a lot of people who have been cooking and juicing and pureeing for years, right? And really afraid, like have the fear of food, of fear of fiber, right? Adding it into their system. But I think when you explain it, yeah, like having a whole blueberry when you're inflamed, if there's narrowing within the intestine, that's going to cause, some issues going through. But if you juice it or throw it in a smoothie, it's much easier to pass through, right? So in terms of the low fiber, I would look at the kind of fiber and modifying that before I just minimize all the fiber and go to everything refined and white.
Yeah, makes sense. So is it fair to say then that, well, people are asking about major gut microbiome changes. Does everyone who has an intolerance or who sees you, do they need a major shift in their gut microbiome is my first question.
No, I don't think so. I don't. Do you?
No, this is the thing. I don't. Is it that your gut microbiome is in such a dysbiosis that you had those symptoms?
No.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Like, I think it depends on how long people have symptoms. Antibiotics. That's
antibiotic use. Yeah, that's a big one, I think.
Right. And so what they found with people who, maybe have post-infectious IBS or something like that, or have been on and off antibiotics, is that, it could take 4 weeks to restore the microbiome, but it could be up to 6 months with some people. And I think that's one of the challenges with this question, is that there's so little research out there, because as we talked about before, over the course of 20 years, how things have changed. But really, this microbiome talk has not been very long, right? In terms of how much time they've had for some of the research to see long-term studies happen. But I think everybody is different. Like, it's amazing to me how fast people get back on their feet with small changes, and how long it takes other people, based on the fact that they could be doing this for 20, 30 years. And they have other factors like the stress, they have anxiety, they have depression. All of those things can feed into how long it takes for the gut microbiome to improve as well, right?
Yeah, so they influence the gut microbiome, but that influence on the gut microbiome is not necessarily why you're having the intolerance. I think it's important to clarify. Yes, it does appear that you can optimize the microbiome, and that may indirectly affect other aspects of our health. I mean, it's very new, but it does sort of appear that way. But then to say, well, what's your healthy microbiome? We cannot say, and we're unfortunately nowhere near to saying that, even if the microbiome testing companies are saying otherwise. Like, for example, myself, if I grew up in Australia, my healthy microbiome there would be different if I myself grew up in Indonesia, for example. My gut bacterial action, that whole balance, that ecosystem would look different, because I've been exposed to different food and water and viruses and other bacteria growing up. And so I could be healthy in both instances, but have a different balance or look to my microbiome if it was tested. So there isn't, and that's, and then it's also your genetic background, etc. All these things influence it. So I think that's an important point for people to understand, that it's not necessarily that your microbiome is out of whack. I think probiotic companies and supplements are pushing that narrative as well. And that's why they're probably the ones doing it the most. And that's not to say probiotics, like I know we spoke about it last time, probiotics certainly have their place in treatment. And I know that you use them. Yeah. It's more acute, right? It's more
with an antibiotic when you're taking it, right? Like, but long-term, like, I don't know. It's amazing. Like, I can say probably I've had the same amount of people who have walked into my office saying, yeah, you know what? I tried a probiotic and this made it worse. It didn't make a difference at all. Right. Versus the people who have been like, oh, I've been on probiotic for years. Yeah, it's definitely helping, but they're still sitting there. Right. Like, so it's not helping enough that their symptoms are gone. Right. And they're pretty, controlled and pretty hyper aware in terms of what they're eating, but it's still right. And it might make a difference for some, but I think it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to be for everybody. And there's, again, not tons of clinical evidence saying we should absolutely be taking a probiotic if you have any of these disorders whatsoever, right? So I think there's a place for them, but I think it's really important to individualize it based on who needs it.
Certainly. And if you're going to start a low FODMAP diet by yourself, I would suggest removing all possible confounding factors that make things confusing. And oftentimes, with our clients, it is a probiotic and some other supplements that are
completely.
They're going to make the process longer because they just add complications.
Yeah. So, and especially if they're already on one. If they're already on one and you check the ingredients and it looks like, it's FODMAP safe and it's not going to interact with the elimination phase, then by all means, continue it. You want to continue it. But if somebody isn't on a probiotic and they're like, oh, I'm going to take a probiotic and start these dietary changes, it's impossible to figure out what's actually making a difference and what's working. So it's just not worth it. And I think when people see the improvements that are made overall within the gut without the probiotic, especially during that 2 to 4 weeks or whatever they're doing the elimination for, it's amazing because probiotics never come back up in the conversation. Right? Yeah. Like they've noticed the changes that the diet has made. So it's like, well, do I have to spend money now on this probiotic on top of that? It's like, probably not. You could probably just keep your fiber up and be fine, right? Like without needing the probiotic at all.
Yeah. And you don't need to spend $50 a month on a probiotic. Yeah. You're looking at $600 a year. You're looking at, if you're going to do that the rest of your life, you can see it starts to add up and it's unnecessary. Okay, let's just go to some of these comments here and we'll see if any are relevant. So, Claire in Scotland. My grandma's from Edinburgh, Claire. That's cool. Judy from Alabama. I have some of you guys, if you comment, it doesn't show your name because you have to give like permissions or something. I don't really understand how it works. But anyway, there's this question. I don't really know if it's relevant. Is there a way to recover the microbiome when one has SIBO without using antibiotics? So I'm going to assume this person means they did a rifaximin or some sort of antibiotic protocol for SIBO.
Right.
Can I then recover without? Wait, is there a way to recover?
No, I think it's without using rifaximin.
Right. Okay. Oh, you can. There's like natural alternatives that seem to have a bit of evidence, right? Candibactin with like peppermint or oregano, I think, and allicin from garlic is kind of an alternative protocol that actually anecdotally and has some evidence. Do you know of anything else?
No, those are the two that I've found that when people don't go through a gastroenterologist, that they go through a naturopath. And in Canada, those are the ones that they use. I found that, and this is just anecdotal, just based on what people have told me, is that they found that there's some kind of relief. But again, it doesn't seem to be as long lasting as going on the antibiotics.
Would you then use a probiotic after the antibiotic treatment for SIBO?
Yeah, so one of the gastroenterologists that I work with does use a probiotic after the antibiotic. He also uses psyllium, like he'll use a combination of the rifaximin and neomycin, and then he'll also use a garlic supplement on top of that, right? And a psyllium fiber at the same time. So
just to clarify, the garlic supplement is not, because people are like, but it's a high FODMAP. So the garlic supplement is allicin, which is like a bioactive compound in garlic that has the beneficial properties, but does not have the FODMAPs.
Yeah, because one of the things about going on the antibiotic with SIBO is that you almost want to have garlic, right? Like you want to have those prebiotic fibers. It tends to work better in combination with the antibiotics. So it's almost like looking at eating what you want, more high FODMAP foods, because it tends to work better with the antibiotics, and then transitioning to a low FODMAP diet after that, right? So that's one option. And it's wrapping your head around it as well, right? Because if I have somebody who's gone to a naturopath and done a more natural kind of route using those other like not antibiotics, but, SIBO remedies that they're kind of doing. And then they've seen a gastroenterologist. It's like, it's hard to wrap their head around adding something that might have garlic in it with the antibiotic when they've been following low FODMAP. Right.
Mhm.
So, and I don't know from your experience, Joe, like, from what I've read is that the importance is that you're actually following more of a higher FODMAP diet when you're on an antibiotic for SIBO, and then going to low FODMAP. But it's very consistent to find it's very common for somebody to come in and say, oh, I did the antibiotic and it didn't really work, but I was eating low FODMAP at the same time. Right.
Yes.
And it's like, oh,
Yes. It's like people who get the celiac disease test, but they've been not eating gluten.
Yeah, not eating gluten. It's exactly the same thing, right? And I'm like, oh my God. So they just did, around, and it's not cheap here to get those antibiotics at all.
No.
They've already done a round and they've been eating low FODMAP the whole time. And it's like.
Yeah. So the idea being that you want the bad bacteria to be active, right, for the antibiotic to be most effective at finding those bacteria. So for them to be active, it's like, well, eat the things that they enjoy, which is typically a lot of the high FODMAP foods.
Right.
So you do that through the antibiotic process so that everything is active and it can come and find and hopefully kill those bad bacteria or restore some balance. Then you transition to low FODMAP, and then we start to introduce things very methodically. That's kind of the process. Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to get bogged down on this topic. What happens if it is the opposite, too much bacteria in the gut? Well, then that's SIBO, right? I think that's the answer to that question. That's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Okay. So the first question, how long it takes for major gut microbiome changes to occur post-diet? I guess the answer is changes occur quickly. The more you're adding in these beneficial fibers that you tolerate, the better.
Yeah.
Would it be a major change? That depends on the person. Is a major change in your gut microbiome necessary for you to be in better health? That's also probably not true, but depends on the person. Is that fair summary?
Yep, I agree.
I wish we had a concrete. If people want a concrete answer, that sounds like we're kind of dancing around, but that's the reality.
I really think that it's important to realize that, like, when you're looking at the clinical evidence on how long it takes to change the microbiome and how long those will last, that these studies that we're talking about, like, they're 2019. Like, it's not something that, has kind of dropped off and not being investigated. Like, these are recent, like 2019, like beginning of 2020, saying that there's not enough long-term study to kind of figure out how long it lasts. But I think that the biggest factor is that it's really overall habitual changes that will influence the microbiome. It's not just diet, but the longer you can maintain all of these good habits, the healthier your microbiome will be long-term.
Mm-hmm. And just quickly, the things that are affecting microbiome, it's amazingly the things that everyone's always been saying. So your diet, are you physically active? Do you sleep well? How stressed out are you or anxious? What's your mental health and your mental space like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next thing. Let's move on to this question, and tell me how you want to address this one. Are processed foods actually that bad for health? We could start with that. And then they put in parentheses with good macros and micros. Mm-hmm. So I guess, are processed foods actually bad for health, even good processed foods?
Right. Well, I think it's important to realize that we eat a lot of processed foods just by changing the nature of the food in the first place, right? By cooking it, you're processing it at home, right? So it's a fine line in terms of the processed foods that we're talking about in boxes that have a really long ingredient list with half the things you can't even, pronounce. Those are the highly processed foods that are probably higher in refined sugars that are lower in fiber, and then therefore it's going to affect the microbiome. But if you're looking at frozen fruits or frozen vegetables, they're also processed. If there's nothing else in it besides the vegetable, they're actually picking these fresh fruits and vegetables and freezing it. So they're actually maintaining a lot of the nutrients. Or canned beans, rinsing off the beans. They've done processing in terms of getting them into the can, but there's still healthy sources of fiber and protein that can be adding nutrition to a lot of foods at the same time, right? So it's just a balancing act in terms of which foods we're kind of talking about. So are all processed foods bad? No, but are there a lot of them that are more refined and have a lot of stuff in them that could adversely affect or absorption issues or the microbiome? Absolutely. And so by looking at the ingredient list, it really helps. The shorter the ingredient list, the better. One of the things that I find really common is when people are using like protein powders, and I ask them the ingredients. We're sitting on a virtual consult and they go and they grab the protein powder and they're reading the ingredients to see what kind of sources are in there, what kind of ingredients. And it's like 5 minutes later and they're still reading the ingredients, not because they can't pronounce it, just because the list is so long. And I'm like, I think that answers our question. I think there's better products out there that have 3 to 4 ingredients. Let's just go with that.
The problem is it's a protein powder with vitamins A, D, E, K, and antioxidants from spinach and beetroot, and it's this crazy cocktail of wellness. And ironically, if you've got digestive issues, probably not good for you at this current point in time.
And I think that it's really, finding alternatives or substitutes that can still provide the same kind of nutrients and probably more without all the extras. Right. And one of those things is, instead of using a protein powder with 35 ingredients, and you can't even find the protein, is look at if you're making a smoothie, can't you just add Greek yogurt, like lactose free, whatever, like it's 18 grams of protein, you're getting the probiotic in it. You don't need all that other stuff. So let's just put that aside, because we don't really know like the load of having that protein powder every day, what that's going to cause. Right. So I think, but I don't think you have to limit all protein powders or all protein bars or things like that. There are better ones out there, and the fewer ingredients. I don't know if you have like an RX bar, where it's like their whole marketing is based on, we have 3 to 4 ingredients. That's it. Right. So I think it's slowly evolving and slowly changing to the ones that had you have to turn over the package to read everything. But it is important to realize that we're processing foods all the time just by cooking them and changing them. Right. So.
Yeah. So there's a nuance in the question about a processed food is basically anything that's not how it was when it started in its original form. So, but where I guess the question is referring to, how the media portrays processed food. And are they bad for health? No. I mean, if you're eating frozen vegetables or tinned vegetables instead of no vegetables, they're really great for your health. They're absolutely fantastic, actually, because you were not eating any vegetables. Maybe you couldn't get fresh vegetables or they're too expensive, whatever. And now you're eating tinned processed vegetables. That is amazing. You've 100x your health there. So in that context, they're brilliant.
Yeah. And I think that when you're looking at the context of the ingredient list, another way of looking at a product to see if it's good, especially in regards to cereals or things like that, is looking at how many grams of fiber are actually in the cereal. So I kind of give a guideline, like if you don't see a 5 to 6 grams per serving, when you flip over the nutrient, put it down. Because it's just more refined. You're probably going to be up in sugars, things like that. It's a lower fiber cereal. It's like, meh. And that's when, in the context of the gut, it's not really going to help the gut at the same time too, right? So giving people, what am I looking for in a product to know if it's good? Using, the ingredient list is a really good one. And then the fiber intake in terms of how much fiber you're actually getting from that product.
Do you have a per 100 gram fiber recommendation?
So we just use we have a serving, whatever the serving is on there. If they give you a serving of half a cup or 100 grams, they'll tell you exactly how many grams of fiber are in it. So that's why I use like the 5 to 6, because it's based on the serving size, especially in terms of cereals or granola bars or crackers or things like that. Crackers and things like that tend to be a little bit lower. So I might say even just a 2 to 3. We just look for a 2 to 3 for all the other stuff and 5 for cereals, because they just end up packing a bunch of sugar in there at the same time, right? And looking at like, I'm going to buy this oatmeal. Well, it has 5 grams of, fiber. That's awesome. But also paying attention to some of the sugars, because most of them are added. So, can you just get rolled oats? Do you have to buy the instant packs that have maple and brown sugar, or can you use like rolled oats and just sprinkle a little bit of your own brown sugar or maple syrup on it? Because you're probably halving the amount, you're reducing the amount of sugar big time just by modifying it.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because, the question, I know a lot of people thinking, well, processed foods are not good. The reason, if you think about junk processed foods, like, Pop-Tarts. I used to eat Pop-Tarts all the time when I was a kid, or like Cocoa Pops or Fruit Loops or whatever these cereals. They're not great for most people, because it's not the fact that they're processed. It's just that they're got so much added sugar in them, and they're so refined that the fiber is stripped, and therefore you have a food that is not very high quality and probably not in line with your health goals.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's the reality. As unsexy as that answer is, then the next one, I don't know how long we need to spend on this, is getting organic produce that much better than non-organic?
So when I look at that, it's really about what you want to spend your money on is a big part, because organic is obviously a lot more expensive. And what is important, if you are going to buy organic, which kinds of foods are more important than others? Bananas, it has appeal, right? But exposed fruit like berries or things like that, if you're going to pick a kind of produce to take home, then maybe using something that has that is exposed, right, to more of those, pesticides or blah blah blah. The concern about going organic versus not organic, maybe choosing produce that that you're more susceptible to get that kind of stuff with like berries, but maybe buying regular bananas, right? But buying corn puff cereal organic is like, really? Like, right? Like I kind of put it on like a sliding scale in terms of what's more important, right? A lot of people don't have the funds to buy all organic foods, right? Or want to go to 3 different grocery stores to find something. So, and then there's also meats and things like that, right? Like if you find that it's really important that you're going to have organic meats and fish and things like that, then maybe focusing on the meats and the produce that's exposed, and then leave the other stuff as not.
Yeah. Like organic peanut butter cups versus regular peanut butter cups.
Probably
it's
not.
like the problem is not whether it's organic or not. The problem is that it's a peanut butter cup.
It's a peanut butter.
And there's no problem with peanut butter cups, but like I'm assuming you've got some sort of health goal and you're trying to be healthier. Well, you've probably look at your intake of peanut butter cups.
Yeah, organic frosted flakes not making a difference.
No, that's the biggest.
No.
So it's people, and this is a problem. People focus, not intentionally, obviously, but they don't understand. This is why you need help, because people don't understand what to focus on and what's just doesn't really matter. Like what's the 1% and what's the 99% that moves the needle, and people just focusing on the 1% because it sounds very interesting or sexy or whatever it is. And it's like you could be 100% doing that 1% perfectly, but the other 99%, which actually matters, you're not doing. And then you wonder why nothing changes for you. Like for me, it's like if I'm like business stuff, it's very easy for me to get distracted by, oh, this thing sounds good, or this sounds like good marketing, or whatever. And I go for these little things when it's like, hey, actually, you're doing the right things. You just got to show up and keep doing them and be consistent.
Exactly. Pick your battles.
Yeah, exactly. So, cool. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone have a question before we hop off? I think we've got... What are your thoughts of vegan protein powder bars over non-vegan? Well,
Um, yeah. So if you're on a low FODMAP diet, vegan protein powders are super difficult. Like, I just find the load of all the high FODMAP, the kale and the beets and the this and that, like, it's not to mention the inulin and chicory root that's in a lot of those products, is just, it's over the top. And I've worked with several, like, lots of clients who are just like, yeah, they're having, like, our plant-based protein powder every single day, and we just remove that, and it's like, thanks for coming, right? So that's a big one. And then I think the advantage is, like we're talking about with processing, that there are some products that I know of that are plant-based that don't have all of those options in them, right? And are fairly clean. So there are options out there, but really they're very limited. And so, yeah, it's an option. But I think, again, it comes back to reading the ingredients, right? Yes. And if you can tolerate the whey and you don't mind the whey isolate, then there's some options there too. It doesn't have to be plant-based.
Yeah. And then in terms of like vegan versus not, I mean, that's up to you, right? If it's environmental thing, then by all means you do you. But in terms of FODMAPs and IBS, yeah, they tend to be. This is what, like, low FODMAP and vegan is
challenging.
Very, very challenging, because it very much clashes in many aspects.
But it definitely, that's a whole other webinar.
Yeah, it's a whole other topic. Cool. All right. Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching, and thanks, Rory. That was good. I mean, hopefully we've answered people's questions. I think so. It's very, it's kind of like I'm trying to concise all these 10 years I've been doing this to answer these questions very succinctly and very quickly. I just hope people believe us that it's like, you don't have to worry about processed stuff. If you're eating vegetables, like, that's good.
Yeah.
Do that. The microbiome, is your microbiome perfect? I don't know. Is it the cause of your food intolerance? Maybe slightly, but you don't just need to fix the microbiome. I think you need to pinpoint your triggers, maybe look at what might be also contributing to your food intolerance outside of food as well. Good one. So if anyone wants any help with nutrition stuff or IBS or gut issues, or has a question, send me a message. We'll definitely get Rory on again to go over a new topic. I haven't figured out what yet, but we'll speak possibly next month.
Sounds great.
Cool.